name is Steve Smith. This is TQA Weekly. And if you have questions, comments, suggestions for topics, email me at ask@tqaweekly.com. Go to my website, tqaweekly.com. You can interact with others on this episode, past others. Find other ways to subscribe. And, of course, use a contact form and email me directly. And, of course, if you're already on YouTube, you can do so down below. And if you want to get these shows 24 to 48 hours in advance of everyone else, go to patreon.com/TQA Weekly and help me out with this show by becoming a patron today. And this week's topic is about how Linux has yet to be adopted and remains a third-class citizen behind Windows and Mac. Some Linux guru, tech head, fanboy's head is going to explode, but they will have a hard time saying that what I'm about to tell you is false. So first, let's talk about the ease of getting an operating system. If you want to buy a brand new computer, you go to a computer store or brick and mortar store like Best Buy, and you walk in through the doors and you're looking for a laptop, a tablet, a desktop, probably looking at Apple, Acer, HP, Asus, something like this. And you can always get the devices with OS X or Mac OS or Windows pre-installed. Yeah, I know that guy at the counter's telling you that he has to charge you more to actually set up Windows, but you don't have to pay it, by the way, because it's completely bogus. The operating system, for all intents and purposes, is already pre-installed. If you go to a computer store and actually order a custom computer, you'll have the option of installing Windows or not installing Windows. For the most part, it's not that there's a gimmick. You can't actually get Mac installed on anything you want. Mac is only installed on Mac devices. But for the most part, because of the next issue, then you really only have a choice of getting Windows pre-installed or not getting installed at all. This is because Linux has problems supporting brand new hardware day one. And computer stores tend to sell brand new hardware day one. It's where you would get your brand new motherboard and processor and all that shiny RAM that you like to install in your windowed case. That's where you would go. And they don't necessarily allow people to install Linux as a service because they can't necessarily support it. Because they can't support it because there's no drivers. And because there's no drivers necessarily day one for the hardware, the operating system has a hard time running at all on those computers, which means that you get pissed off at the computer store as opposed to, you know what, just not being given the option to begin with. So it's usually like, do you want Windows installed? Which Windows do you want to have installed? Or we'll put all the hardware together and you deal with it. Used to work in a computer store. That's basically how it worked. We didn't support Linux. And there's many reasons for this. But does that make Windows and Mac better than Linux? Yes and no. If we're talking about connecting the world in a way that makes it easy for everyone to just connect to the world, of course they are better. But Linux is free. At least a lot of people will use this. Linux is usually free. It's not always free. But there is a learning curve to it. Not to mention that, like I just said, drivers are not necessarily posted day one by the manufacturer, if at all. A lot of the drivers are actually user created from the community of Linux users, which means it will take some time for those drivers to actually be built. Now, while processors and RAM are fairly easy to develop for in Linux world, other things aren't as easy to actually support. Now, in a world where you would say choice is a positive, it is also negative. A lot of people out there are going to say that Linux distributions aren't just skins, they are very similar to Android itself, which I call bogus on. Android, even though it shares a very close-knit connection to the Linux world, is far more like Windows than you'd actually want to actually admit. So if you were to update every single Android device to the latest and greatest version of Android in the way that it is theorized possible, especially if you have a Nexus device, if you were to update all the way up to the top, you would all end up in the same place, exactly like Windows. That's not what happens when you're using Linux. If you have Debian or you have Red Hat and you update all the way to the top, you're still running either Debian or Red Hat or any other flavor of Linux. End of story. You're not ending up in a supercluster of one unique kernel that can be used by everything. That's not how it works. So Mac always ends up in the same place. Windows always ends up in the same place. iOS devices always end up in the same place when you update all the way to the top. And guess what? So does Android. Meaning that not only is Linux actually plagued by the fact that there's so many different variants and flavors and distributions, but because there's so many different ones, it's actually harder to develop for Linux for companies, which leads us into the productivity and gaming issue. Productivity is something that people take seriously. If you can't support Microsoft Office, you can't support Outlook, if you can't support Adobe products, or you can't support a lot of other different kinds of tools out there that people need to use, people are not going to use you at all. When it comes to gaming, nobody's going to install a operating system on a brand new computer that's worth $2,500 or more, even if it's worth $1,000 or more, to actually end up with all the problems of having to figure out the operating system when they can just install Windows for $125 and just start from there and actually get all their productivity done and gaming done without having to worry about anything. Why? Because it's just so much easier. If you wanted people to actually use Linux, Linux would have to get rid of all the flavors and variants and distributions and make a supercluster of one unique experience that's easier for every single user to understand and allow each person to very simply explain to somebody else how to use it. It would have to actually be able to be supported by the developers of software and hardware at the same time, and all from day one. And on top of all else, the experience needs to be the same on every single device supporting that operating system, so that no matter where the person is, they don't have to keep relearning everything, which is a problem if you're a Debian user in Linux and you move to Red Hat. While a lot of the tasks are similar, there are other tasks that are different, and so different that the differences between going from that way are far more different than going from, let's say, Windows 8 to Windows 10. So essentially speaking, if we want more people to adopt Linux today, we need more companies to adopt Linux. People will continue to use the applications they love. So if companies adopt Linux and have Linux obtain more uniformity for the applications to be supported far more easier by the developers of the applications, and also by the developers of hardware, then maybe people will actually start using Linux. But please, 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 don't ever tell somebody that the reason why they should be using Linux is because it is free or free of viruses. Because as we all know, this is all utter bullshit. Free is only good if it's easy to use. It is adopted by everyone, adopted by all application and hardware developers, as well as those responsible for productivity and gaming. Until we get that, the reason why Windows and Mac are so popular is because the experience is far more uniform and easier to explain than Linux is, and all the developers develop for it anyway. End of story. Like or dislike this episode, share your comments down below, and of course, don't forget to become a patron by going to patreon.com/TQA Weekly. All the links are down below. Have a great day, and goodbye.